Subscribe because it's free.
The Accord of Orion was more than just a treaty. It was a thin thread that held a fragile galaxy together. Signed a century ago, it marked the first time every major species agreed peace. No border conflicts. No surprise attacks. No preemptive strikes. The rules were simple. Violate them, and the consequences would be absolute. No one doubted that the United Terran Federation was the strongest military force in the galaxy. Their technological progress, tactical brilliance, and sheer will to survive had brought them from a single planet to a galactic power in record time. But despite their capability, humanity had chosen peace. They followed the truce, honored every agreement, and did not seek war. The Zelvari Dominion, however, mistook that restraint for weakness. For years, they whispered in dark rooms, crafting their plans. They saw humanity's trade networks expanding, their colonies thriving, their influence growing, and they hated it. The Dominion's leaders feared a future where humans controlled too much, where their power couldn't be challenged. So they decided to strike first, to remind humanity of its place. When the attack came, it was not against warships or military installations. No, the Zelvari wanted to send a message. They targeted Halcyon Prime, a peaceful hub world, home to diplomats, merchants, and families, a place of trade and cultural exchange, a place with no weapons. The first explosions tore through the planet's surface without warning. Orbital defenses, never meant for war, shattered in seconds. The Zelvari fleet descended like vultures, unleashing fire and fury upon defenseless civilians. Entire cities were reduced to ash. The screams of billions echoed through emergency channels, then fell silent. Across the galaxy, live broadcasts caught the horror in real time. There was no provocation, no demand for surrender, just extermination. And as the last human distress signals faded, the Zelvari Supreme Commander addressed the galaxy. The era of human arrogance ends today. The Galactic Council met in an emergency session, horrified but divided. Some argued that action must be taken against the Dominion. Others hesitated, fearing that intervention would lead to full-scale war. But none of them truly mattered, because at that moment, only one question hung in the air. How will humanity respond? Inside the United Terran Federation's war chambers, there was no shouting, no arguments, just a deep, suffocating silence. The President of Earth sat at the head of the table, unreadable. Around them, generals, admirals, and diplomats waited for orders. The weight of the decision hung over them all. A single phrase had been written into the Accord of Orion, a phrase every alien species had read, but never truly believed. If you break this truce, humanity will never forgive, never forget, and never stop. The silence ended with the President's voice. Calm, final, truce broken, no more restraint. Across every human world, the message was relayed. A quiet fury swept through the Federation. Flags lowered. Factories shifted into war mode. Shipyards that had lain dormant for decades roared to life. The full weight of the human war machine, long held in check, began to move. On the outer rim, human fleets vanished from their patrol routes, slipping into the void like ghosts. Unseen, unheard, waiting for the command to strike. Deep within black sites, protocols marked Project Nemesis were unlocked. AI warships, experimental weapons, and dreadnoughts designed for total war, hidden away under the promise of peace, were prepared for deployment. The Zelvari Dominion had mistaken humanity's mercy for weakness. But now they would learn the truth. Humanity had never been weak. They had only been patient. And now their patience was gone. The Zelvari celebrated too soon. Their fleets patrolled the outer sectors, basking in their so-called victory. They expected fear, surrender, maybe a desperate plea for negotiation. Instead, they got silence. Not a single human response. No threats, no counter-declarations. Just an eerie, suffocating quiet. Days passed, then a week. The Dominion's war councils grew uneasy. Where was humanity's retaliation? Where were their ships? Then, without warning, Zelvari fleets started vanishing. Entire battle groups, fully armed and prepared, simply stopped responding. No distress calls. No escape pods. No wreckage. One moment, they were there. The next, they were gone. Panic set in. Dominion admirals scrambled, sending scouts to investigate. What they found shattered them. Floating in the darkness of space were the remains of the Vindicator Armada, one of their strongest fleets, reduced to drifting debris. No battle had taken place. No return fire. Just surgical destruction, precise and unstoppable. A single Zelvari vessel, heavily damaged, managed to crawl back to friendly space. Its crew, shaking and incoherent, could only utter one phrase over and over. They're already here. Then came the first message from humanity. No speeches, no justifications, just 6 words, broadcast across every Dominion channel. You wanted war. You have it. Within hours, the nightmare truly began. Across the Dominion, entire supply chains collapsed. Space stations critical for fueling warships detonated from within. Weapons depots ignited in massive infernos. Even Zelvari communications were sabotaged. Every encrypted channel overridden with a single, haunting transmission. The sound of Halcyon Prime's last screams. Zelvari worlds, once untouched by war, now burned. Humanity wasn't fighting for territory. They weren't looking to conquer. This was extermination, methodical, relentless, and utterly terrifying. The Revenant fleet struck first. These were not ordinary warships. They were nightmares in metal, equipped with technology the Dominion had never seen. Each ship moved with unnatural precision, striking without warning and vanishing before retaliation could begin. The Omega-class Dreadnought, a warship so massive it blotted out the stars, emerged over Dominion-held space. Its arrival was heralded by silence. No demands, no ultimatums, just a single pulse of energy. Seconds later, an entire planetary defense grid went dark, and then the bombardments began. The Dominion's warlords, so confident days ago, now begged for reinforcements. But there were none. Every fleet sent to counter the human advance was erased before it could even fire a shot. Every planetary governor who tried to flee found their escape ships disabled, their fate sealed. Then came the psychological warfare. Captured Zelvari officers were returned, not as prisoners, but as messengers. Not a single one was harmed. Not a single one was tortured. Instead, they were sent back with a simple message. Tell them what you saw. They spoke of battles that weren't battles at all. Of human ships that seemed to move before the enemy even fired. Of cities that went silent overnight, as if something had simply erased them from existence. Of war fought not with brutality, but with terrifying precision. A Dominion admiral, once proud, collapsed into seat after hearing their reports. They fight like gods. The Galactic Council, once hesitant to act, now panicked. Humanity had been silent for a week. Now they had spoken, and the entire galaxy trembled. The Council's envoys rushed to send messages, pleading for peace, for mediation, but there was no response. For humanity, this was not a war. This was vengeance, and they were just getting started. The Zelvari Dominion was crumbling. Their fleets had been shattered, their colonies in rebellion, their people in a panic. The war they had started had become something else, something far worse than they ever imagined. This wasn't a battle for territory or conquest. Humanity wasn't here to negotiate borders or claim resources. They were here to end the Dominion, and the Zelvari knew it. The Supreme Commander, once so arrogant in his declaration of war, now stood in the central war chamber, his face hollow with exhaustion. Every attempt to strike back had failed. Every desperate counteroffensive had been met with swift annihilation. Perhaps we should request a ceasefire, one of his advisors suggested hesitantly. The Supreme Commander turned to glare at him. You think they will listen? Have you seen what they've done? The room fell silent. They all knew the truth. Humanity wasn't responding like other species. There were no drawn-out wars, no diplomatic backchannels, no half-hearted skirmishes. The humans had made one thing clear. The Dominion was either going to surrender or cease to exist. And now, the decision was no longer in Zelvari hands. A human fleet had arrived in the skies over the Zelvari homeworld. Not 1 or 2 warships, but hundreds, dreadnoughts the size of cities. stealth bombers waiting in orbit, their judgment fleet, a force never before deployed in full. The entire Dominion now rested under the shadow of Earth's retaliation. A single transmission was sent down to the surface. Surrender unconditionally, or we end you. There was no bravado in the voice, no anger, no threats, just an unshakable certainty. The Zelvari leadership scrambled. They pleaded for terms, for negotiations. They offered to pay reparations, to pull back their forces, to disband their military. But there was no reply. Humanity would not negotiate, not after Halcyon Prime. The Supreme Commander felt the weight of his choices pressed down on him. He had believed humanity was weak. He had convinced himself that they wouldn't retaliate, that they didn't have the will to fight back. He had been wrong. The war was over, not because the Zelvari had fought and lost, but because they had fought something they never understood in the first place. Then, just when all seemed lost, a message arrived from an unexpected source. A Zelvari scientist, one of the few who had questioned the war from the beginning, had sent a desperate transmission to the human fleet. It contained evidence, classified Dominion files, secret recordings. It revealed the truth. The Supreme Commander had not attacked Halcyon Prime out of strength, but out of fear. He had convinced himself that humanity was secretly preparing to break the truce first. He had believed that by striking first, he could force them into submission before they had a chance to reveal their supposed hidden plans. But there had never been a human conspiracy, no secret invasion plan, no betrayal. The war had started because of a paranoid assumption, and now billions were dead because of it. The scientist transmission reached humanity's war council. For the first time since the war began, there was hesitation. Some argued that it changed nothing. The Zelvari had still broken the truce and slaughtered innocents. Others pointed out that this revelation proved their leadership had acted out of desperation, not malice. The President of Earth sat in silence, listening to both sides. Then finally, she spoke. The truth does not erase what they have done. She looked at the incoming reports. The Zelvari homeworld was in chaos. Their people, their soldiers, their civilians, all waiting for judgment. Humanity had the power to end them here and now. The question was no longer could they do it. It was should they. The silence over the Zelvari homeworld was deafening. Millions of Zelvari stood frozen in their cities, staring at the sky, waiting for humanity's final judgment. The colossal warships of the Judgment Fleet loomed above them, their weapons primed. One command, and the Dominion would cease to exist. The Supreme Commander of the Zelvari knelt in his war chamber, his body trembling. He had led his people into this disaster, blinded by arrogance and fear. Now he had nothing left, not even his pride. His advisors had fled. His armies had collapsed. There was no hope of victory, no chance to fight back. The only question that remained was whether humanity would show mercy. A final message came from the United Terran Federation. It was not a demand. It was not an ultimatum. It was a sentence. You are no longer fit to rule. The Zelvari braced for annihilation, but the bombardment never came. Instead, the first explosions erupted within the Dominion's own ranks. Key military command centers were wiped out in precision strikes. Government bunkers, emergency networks, and intelligence hubs were systematically erased. The ruling warlords of the Dominion were targeted one by one, their fortresses reduced to ruins. And then, without warning, the ships of the Judgment Fleet turned and left. The Zelvari did not understand at first. Why had humanity spared them? Why had they stopped when victory was so close? Then the truth became clear. Humanity had not spared the Zelvari. They had dismantled them. The Dominion's leadership was gone, its infrastructure shattered beyond repair. The systems that had oppressed and controlled the Zelvari people were now nothing but dust. And without them, there was nothing left to hold the Dominion together. Civil war erupted almost immediately. Former generals, planetary governors, and warlords all scrambled for power, but there was no stability left to seize. Their fleets had been annihilated, their supply chains cut, their armies leaderless. The Dominion was dead, not by human hands, but by its own collapse. The Galactic Council, watching from afar, finally understood what had happened. Humanity had chosen not to exterminate their enemy, but to make sure they would never rise again. They had removed the threat without breaking their own moral code. It was a warning as much as it was a punishment. The lesson was clear. Humanity was not cruel, but they were absolute. They would not seek revenge for the sake of revenge. But if you forced their hand, if you broke their truce, slaughtered their people, and pushed them too far, there would be no escape. The Zelvari Dominion had destroyed the peace, and in return, humanity had destroyed them. Years later, the ruins of the once mighty Dominion remained a stark reminder to the galaxy. The Accord of Orion was rewritten with a single amendment: do not test humanity's wrath. No one ever did again.